Welcome to the Total Soccer Show and a special edition of USMNT Weekly in which we deliver the TSS manifesto on how to get the United States men's national team on course for a successful World Cup. On this episode, my esteemed co-host will combine to build a plan to keep Poch's team from being an also-ran, a platform to help the team perform, a proclamation to make sure US fans don't have ideas above their station. I could do this all day, but I won't. My name is Ryan Bailey. Joining me, here are the two mans with the plans, starting with Mr. Taylor Rockwell. Hello, Taylor.
Hello, Ryan. I am the most apprehensive about a show I have been in quite some time to do this episode because it's a big one that on the surface is just like, you're speculating about how to make your national team better. It's a fun one. But in reality, there are so many potential problems and potential issues to be ironed out. I'm very excited to have other people to bounce ideas off of, and I'm very excited to watch Ryan attempt to go down the rabbit holes we go down and wade into the weeds that Joe and I are almost certainly going to wade into the weeds upon.
I wouldn't worry about it, Taylor. All we're doing is presuming that we know better than US soccer and Mauricio Pochettino as we look 15 months ahead. That's all we're doing here. We know best, right?
Maybe you're presuming and I'm presuming, but Joe knows for sure. Thankfully, Joe has all the answers. No pressure, Joe.
Joe Lowry, hello, Joe.
Yeah, no pressure at all. I meant to grab my bowl of lemons for today's show. Completely forgot them. They were going to guide me into building this perfect list. I do find, Taylor, that all this is a little bit less stressful if you recognize beforehand that the U.S.'s floor for 2026 is the round of 32 and that their ceiling effectively is the quarterfinals. So really there's not that much wiggle room in there. There's like one game's worth of wiggle room, that round of 16 game. The floor is the knockouts, certainly, and the ceiling is probably not that deep of a run. So we're dealing with degrees of minutia in the middle here, and that comforts me.
It comforts me as well until I'm reminded that it's how you get there, not necessarily what the result was. Because ultimately there are probably 8 nations that could theoretically win a World Cup at any given point, and then there's other nations that could win a game or two. It would be hard to string together the results you would need to make it all the way to the final and win that final. But there's a big difference between kind of grinding it out and being uninteresting and kind of dull along the way versus some dramatic wins and some maybe taking down one Titan along the way. It would be very exciting versus, we did about what was expected. All right, on to 2030.
And that's what you just described, that, we did about what's expected, I think is exactly where we're trending, unless you are any number of former USMNT players that have taken to the media and like to make it very clear that you expect a quarterfinal or a semifinal run at minimum on home soil, in which case, I think you have an unpleasant piece of news coming in 15 months.
Yeah, man. Sorry, Ryan. Eventually, I will let you host the show. All of the former player responses have helped me learn a new adage, because in the past it's been never tell a coach what they did, never tell a player what they did in a game, because they're immediately going to be mad.
Right.
And I guess never tell a past generation that the present one might be a golden generation, because my goodness, does that seem to make them furious.
Correct.
Across the board.
Yeah. The golden albatross laid across the shoulders, Taylor, indeed. Before we get to our manifesto, a quick reminder that we have a bonus feed. It's the best way to support us. Patreon.com/Total Soccer Show. You'll get bonus episodes, bonus video content, and access to our Discord server where all the cool kids are hanging out and having a chat with us. Patreon.com/Total Soccer Show, please. And thank you. And if you want to see 3 gentlemen discussing a USMNT manifesto with your eyes, YouTube is the place to go. Link in the show notes. That's right, Joe.
See it with your ears, you cowards.
Hey, they've got options. That's all
right.
I'm saying.
Yep.
Joe, before we get into our manifesto, are we agreeing with the conceit that there is a disconnect between what we think the US path is towards the World Cup and what we hope it should be?
What do you mean? Say more about that.
Yeah.
I mean, do we think it's on the wrong path right now?
Yes. I don't think you can look at the March window and say that was a success that moved the US closer to feeling better about themselves and to playing really good ball ahead of the World Cup. There were positive things to come out of that window. And I don't think, to be very clear, that it was the U.S. taking 35 giant leaps down the wrong path. I think it was just a window that didn't have nearly the progress that anybody would have hoped, and continued to raise some concerns, some new, and some, most, really ones that we've seen before. But yes, I think the U.S. is certainly at the low point of the very short Mauricio Pochettino era, and is also slapped in the face with the reality of how soon the World Cup is going to be here, and the fact that the pool, and we talked about this, at some point recently, the pool really just hasn't progressed, and this team hasn't progressed since 2022. I think Graham said it. If anything, it sort of feels like they have regressed. So Ryan, the answer to your question, I think is yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the standard for me, I've mentioned it before on the show, remains Jurgen Klopp when he first takes over Liverpool, and how in the first game you can see the players hunting in packs. In the second game, you can see certain pressing triggers when everyone's on the same page. And then there are downturns in form, but you can see how they're adding in new wrinkles, how the team is kind of coming together and gelling. Then you have the transfer window where they're able to make some moves and they get stronger and stronger. And that's what you want to see when a new coach comes in, when there's kind of a new turn of the page. You want to see that organic evolution of he's trying new players. Okay, he's sticking with some of those players. Okay, some of those new players have now found their way into the starting 11 to combine with the existing, like, perceived starting 11. Oh, we've got this new guy who we can bring in. Oh, there's a new look here defensively. And I think that sort of organic preparation is what you would like to see, certainly on a condensed timeline, given how few windows we have remaining until the 2026 World Cup. And I think generally we had seen that, at least to some extent. We've only had, 4 windows for Pochettino, now 5. But in this window, it did feel like a significant missed opportunity where there weren't nearly as many of those sort of organic progressions, organic developments. It felt much more like, ooh, this feels like a lot of the familiar old issues coming home to roost.
Yeah, and sorry, I know we have manifestos to do. Just very briefly, I think if math serves, and I'm not trying to be pedantic here, Taylor, at all, really this was the third full window for Pochettino, because the January camp window was like a weird kind of toss-up. And that is, I know it feels like a lot because it's been months and months and months since Pochettino was hired. It just really isn't. And so I know we were really negative about this team coming out of March, and I think that was well-deserved. At the same time, we're not even halfway through this amount of time that the U.S. has to get to 26. So concerned, yes. A reason to develop a manifesto, yes. Plus it makes for a fun show. But also, there is time. How that time will be used is a bigger question. Sorry, Ryan. I know we got places to go.
All right. So the object of the exercise here, gents, is we're building a roadmap towards the 2026 World Cup for the US. That can be on the field. That can be off the field. We're looking for building blocks to make things better. So, Taylor, your first manifesto point, please.
Tear it all down. No, not quite that level. But I do think there needs to be a come to Jesus moment, I think is what my dad would call it. There needs to be, I think, a frank conversation between Pochettino and this squad about sort of where they are as a team and maybe where they actually are in terms of global prestige and impression. Because I have kind of come around to the idea that I think this team maybe has seen some of the headlines about being a golden generation, has maybe been very proud to be playing in the Champions League more than any other Americans ever have, and to be in FIFA video games and all that good stuff. I don't know if there is as much understanding of what it is to play for the U.S., and some of the historic trends in terms of effort and fight and tenacity and kind of commitment to a communal cause versus an individual one. And I do think that we've lost sight of that a little bit. This is a very grandiose, I think, way to start, albeit a negative grandiose way to start. But I think this team just does not feel like a collective at present. It feels like a bunch of individuals who don't quite know how to play together because they're coming from disparate systems and styles and philosophies, and they haven't really been unified. And a thing that really stuck out to me was a quote from Landon Donovan about one game that they lost when Bruce Arena was the coach. I think the first time was he went to the locker room and was basically like, "Boys, I can't coach effort. That's got to come from you." And I think this team expects effort to be coached is the at least outside impression I have watching them play. And I just think there needs to be a reminder that this team has historically had success when everybody works their socks off and plays as hard as they can, not necessarily when we string together the most passes around midfield.
Yeah, Taylor, so to make sure I'm understanding, because I think I have a point similar to this on my list, is the idea here Poch needs to have this sort of conversation with his players to remind them of their place in the global soccer pool and the U.S.'s place as well in the global soccer pool. Is that conversation to remind the players that, hey, if we're going to have success, that energy and that effort needs to be the baseline that we can build off of, not an optional thing to throw on top. Is that what you're getting at here?
Yeah, I think so. It's the idea essentially that like this team has to accept its limitations is maybe the better way to put it, in that we aren't a team that can come in with a bunch of swagger and bravado and outpossess Canada or outwork Canada or outplay Canada or Panama at present. It's a team that has to kind of find ways to get that energy to where it needs to be so that we can come in and play the way we have historically. And I think some of that then needs to be looking at the squad and maybe reminding them that their spots are not preordained and that they need to justify those selections both in terms of training and in terms of on-field performance. Otherwise, other players might do that for them.
Yeah, I do have something similar on my list. I have up the intensity in defense. I have that on my list coming out of this window. This is a tricky one because defensively, the United States have been quite strong for a long time, right? There's the idea that stereotypically it's the identity of this U.S. team where they're going to work hard, they're going to try hard, they're not very skilled, but they're going to do stuff. And then you do get into some newer generations, and it does seem like there's a shift in how the U.S. want to play, especially under Greg Berhalter, and that's when it really starts, of this team trying to be more precise in their possession play. But really, even as Berhalter tried to put a lot of attention on changing the way the world sees American soccer, he relaxed a lot of those possession principles and became much more of a pragmatist throughout his time with the U.S., where the real strength of that U.S. team wasn't their attacking play. It was their defensive work. They were excellent defensively throughout World Cup qualifying. They were fairly good defensively right up to that Netherlands game at the World Cup. And then you get out of the World Cup and you march towards eventually a manager change after the Copa America, some chaos that went on in that tournament. Really, all the way through that, the through line was that the U.S. was a strong defensive team, an effective defensive team, with Matt Turner making big saves, and a U.S. team that was cohesive and put in a lot of effort and energy, especially with that MMA midfield. And this March window didn't feature a lot of that. It didn't feature that same intensity in the counterpress. It didn't feature that same cohesion in the pressing structure itself. I've already talked about the challenges against Panama. The thing that I don't know is I don't know if that is a flash in the pan because these players are tired at the end of a long European season, and one of these two games that they just played was a third place game that no one cares about. I don't know if that's the case or not. They certainly didn't look like they stacked up to Canada when it came to defensive intensity, and Canada were playing with the exact same context and a lot of the same travel and weariness concerns after a long European season. Still, I don't know if it is a flash in the pan or if this is something that needs to be addressed more seriously. What I do know is at the World Cup last time around, the U.S. seemed to flip the switch and have that intensity. But man, it would be nice to watch this team where it didn't feel like they had a switch to flip and the switch was just on all the time.
I suppose if we were going to, be generous with this point, Joe, like playing in the World Cup, the intensity is going to come with the adrenaline that doesn't necessarily come with 300 people at SoFi Stadium.
Yep.
Being exaggerated numbers there, of course, but like the circumstances are important too. And I think, Taylor, your quote about you can't coach effort, I think is really important, right? That's a very important point to make. And traditionally, the US has been we work and we grind really hard and we do better a bit against stronger opposition because of that. And hopefully, as a positive point, Pochettino is the kind of coach who will get good intensity and will eventually, when the circumstances are right, get that kind of intense performance, hopefully.
Joe, do you have, with that in mind, Joe, do you have thoughts on why we perceive that we haven't seen that level of intensity on the defensive side from the United States? Is it the level of opposition? Is it an uncertainty with the style of play? Is it the personnel itself? Something else entirely?
I guess I would guard against personally saying that we haven't seen that from this team because, again, I think we have. It just has been a bit more sporadic, where it seemed like in 2022 in Qatar, there was a lot of, I think about that England game, and yet it was sort of a weird, ugly game, and Berhalter changed the defensive approach to a 4-4-2 in that game, and there were some shifts there. But the U.S. and Yunus Musa, I remember in particular, being quite good in that game against a very physical defensive England team. There were some scraps in that game, and the U.S. turned up, I think, and they have, right? You think about the home qualifier against Mexico leading into the 2022 World Cup. Taylor, I think you were at that game in Cincinnati, if memory serves. The U.S. were dominant in the midfield in that game. It's in there. It just is a lack of consistency, and I don't know if it's a mentality thing. I don't think it's really a personnel thing, because when you're starting Tyler Adams in midfield, you have some of the personnel to do that effectively. And Poch was super defensive with his approaches, especially in the Panama game with the lineup. I really don't know what it is, but it does seem like there is a pattern of the switch being flipped on, the switch being turned off, and the switch being turned on and turned off. I don't think that was the primary issue in this window, but at a World Cup where you're going to have more and bigger games to play. The hope is certainly that it doesn't even become anything close to an issue in that tournament.
You would hope not, Joe. Indeed. All right. Joe, would you be so kind as to give us your next manifesto point for the USMNT?
Very much so. I'll flip to something more player-specific in this case. And that is, this is the show where I'm going to plant my flag in a different place. And I'm moving it away from Gio Reyna and I'm moving it towards Diego Luna. I think it's easy to get on the runaway hype train with Diego Luna, and I'm tempted. I'm probably guilty here as well. But my point is, make Diego Luna a key player. The U.S. need someone in specific games who can help them break down blocks, who can help them create chances. The U.S. in both of these games in March created just about 0.7 expected goals. They did not create a lot of good chances. They were not a dangerous attacking team by and large. The U.S.'s best moment of the entire window in the attack came via Tim Weah, who is a locked-in starter for this team, I think, and Diego Luna, where Weah's playing a beautiful ball that probably didn't get enough credit from us. A beautiful ball to find Diego Luna in the box, and Luna takes care of the rest on that ball over to Ajaman. The U.S., we saw against Panama, we saw a bunch under Greg Berhalter when Gio Reyna was not available. When the U.S. don't have a high-level playmaker in the final third in central areas, they struggle. And Pulisic is good at a lot of things, and I'll get to a point on him shortly, but he is not the best at connecting in super tight spots. That's not his game. The U.S. needs someone like Diego Luna, like Gio Reyna, but I've given up on Gio Reyna, not fully, but I've given up talking about Gio Reyna at length because it feels fruitless at this point. The U.S. need a Reyna or a Luna to go and help them break teams down in big games. And my last point on this, to really drive it home, is think about the World Cup in 26. We're talking about there being more intensity. Yes, that's true. Think about who the U.S. is going to be playing. In a 48-team World Cup in 2026, the U.S. will be a pot one team. They'll be a seeded team. That means they're going to be favored in at least two, if not all three, likely, of their group stage games. What does that mean? Well, generally speaking, in this sport, the team that has less talent sits deeper and is happy to play for the draw or is happy to play later in the tournament for penalties when we could see this in round of 32 should the U.S. get that far. Right? The U.S. is going to have to break teams down. They're going to have to be the protagonist. They will have no other choice because the opposition will be okay to sit deeper and will not have the same level of expectation and will not have the same need to grasp points that the U.S. will early in this tournament. That's a problem. And the U.S. need a Luna or a Reyna, and I'm shifting to Luna. Like I said, they need someone like that to help them create chances. So my first point on my own here is that Diego Luna needs to earn serious minutes for this team between now and the World Cup.
Joe, just a production note. Don't say we've given up on Gio on the feed. We don't need a call from his parents.
Sorry, my bad. We can get that out in post. That's on me.
Okay.
It did make me wonder what that looks like. Did you take down your framed Gio portrait and put up one of Diego Luna? Is that the process? Do you wear the armband for like a month of mourning?
No, what happened was I just wrote Gio a nice note and asked for my hamstring back. That's all it was. So it's like, you don't get to have this anymore. I need it. Thank you.
So on a similar note, with like making Diego Luna more of a part of the team, getting him more minutes, I was at a bit of a conundrum when it comes to player selection because I think simultaneously, I think there are players that just kind of take that call up for granted, and I think we do to some extent too. When you look at our roster prediction shows, I think if there's a 23-player squad, we're getting 21, like 22 of the players correct most of the time, and I think that's understandable. I think that's the case with a lot of national teams. I think for the ones it isn't the case for, I think it speaks to the difference in depth between the United States and say Germany or England. But I also think that is part of the problem in like guaranteeing spots to players and just knowing that players are going to automatically be in there. At the same time, there are players who should automatically be in there because they are playing at such a high level, because they are such quality either for the United States or for their club or both. And so I think bridging that gap, Diego Luna is a good place to start. What I would like to see done, and not saying this hasn't been done, a lot of the show is us just sort of, if Mauricio Pochettino called us and said, hey, what should I do? Like, presume I've done nothing. What should I do? I would say establish a baseline of which players can be difference makers and where do we have the most strength in depth or relative strength in depth, and then build out your roster and maybe your approach from there, blending it with our perceptions of what Poch wants to do. We know Poch isn't going to change up his entire philosophy based on the personnel he has at his disposal, but I kept thinking about how often the rhetoric around this team has been like, when Dest comes back, if we had Jedi for this game, if Balogun were there, if Pepe were healthy. And that is always going to be the case when you're missing key players. At the same time, I don't know if that is the best idea for always just sort of being like, but when this guy comes back, it's going to be okay. Versus if we do have an injury to Dest again, if Jedi can't go in the World Cup, if we've put all of our eggs into that basket, what does that mean when we can't have players like that? And so I think you have to look at, where do we have fullback depth? Is it more so just kind of conventional fullbacks who are going to stay at home? And if so, how do we either get the best out of those guys to play the way we need them to play, or how do we adjust our approach if we don't have Dest and Jedi, but we have two fullbacks who can kind of do the defensive side more? Should we be more of a bunkering team? And if we're going to be a bunkering team, which attackers give us the most vertical threat? Like, I think what I've kind of landed upon, in my mind at least, is that so many U.S. players are playing in different leagues with different coaches, with different styles and different philosophies. And when you bring all those players together, I think sometimes it shows certainly in the attacking disconnect, also I think defensively. And so getting everybody more on the same page from hey, we're not quite as good as we think we are, but also here's the way we want to play standpoint, I think is only going to make things easier from then developing the style of play we want to play, but also easier in terms of making sure we have a clear identity with a clear understanding of who can be our difference makers.
Yeah, it's so tricky, Taylor, because I think I hear what you're saying, but also you look at this U.S. team, and they're not the same without Jedi Robinson and Serginho Dest and Ricardo Pepi or Florin Balogun. They're not. Like, Max Arston can play left back all we want, and he's not going to be Jedi Robinson. And Joe Scally can play right back all we want, and even Pochettino can shift his approach because you don't have Serginho Dest, right? And Yunus Musa can play that spot, or Scala can play that spot. The U.S. is just straight up going to be a worse team, almost regardless of who is on the field replacing those big name players. So you can make some of those tactical changes. You can make some of those personnel changes to go and say, hey, maybe we want to play a little bit more on the break. Although I think I tried to lay out some of the challenges that the U.S. could have with that in the World Cup, right? Which is sort of what we're talking about. That is not always going to be an option for them. I think that's a slippery slope. I think there's just a very real sense that the U.S. player pool is limited, right? And that's one of the unfortunate things following 2022 is that the pool hasn't really gotten better, and the players in the pool haven't really seemed to progress. And that puts a pretty hard cap, in my mind at least, maybe I'm wrong about this, that puts a pretty hard cap on the actual legitimate options you have to make this team stay at the level or even improve when you're missing a player or two or three or four key players like the U.S. was in this window.
Yeah, I mean, what do you hear me saying, Joe?
I mean, I guess there was a lot there, but one of the things you talked about was, how do you prepare better? It seemed to me, Taylor, how do you prepare better when you're missing key players, right? Of how do you go and prepare? And my honest reaction to that is, well, when the U.S. is missing 3 or 4 key players, they're just not going to be as good regardless of what buttons you try to push. But there's probably a lot else there. I'm not trying to reduce everything you said just to that, but that I think is the point that maybe I would try to push back on a little bit.
Well, yeah, and I think that is like fundamentally the heart of what I'm saying. I would equate it with like if you have like an F1 car and one of the tires blows out and you're like, well, we don't have any of our replacement tires, but we do have one from like this Nissan Rogue, and we're going to put it on and we're just going to hope it works just as well. Like, I kind of think that's what the U.S. is doing. I guess Max Arston in this scenario is the Nissan Rogue tire. Like, but you know immediately that he isn't going to be able to do things the way Jedi Robinson can do them, certainly. But I think that bleeds into, he's not going to close down. So maybe Tyler Adams, have to cheat over a little bit more just to help him. But that pulls Tyler Adams 5 yards out of position. Or maybe he's not going to be as secure on the ball. So we need somebody around him who then is going to be there in case we do lose possession and we don't get counterattacked really quickly. So we're going to move this guy over. But you start to make those little adjustments, and I think it kind of pulls the shape of the team apart. And there is, to some extent, that is a natural byproduct of in-game adjustments and tactics and player shortages. At the same time, I think oftentimes the U.S., when it already doesn't have a clear idea of how it wants to play, or at the very least doesn't have the ability to successfully play the way they want to play, if you are then further diluting that and further tinkering with it and further pulling it apart, I think you're kind of trying to fix the tire that doesn't really work while also driving the car simultaneously.
I guess where I come from is to use Jedi Robinson as the example, because it's a relevant one for this window. All of the tires that aren't Jedi Robinson who can play left back are Nissan Rogue tires. Like Joe Scally. Yeah. So we saw 2 different approaches at left back for the U.S. in this window. The first game was Joe Scally at left back, and Pochettino. And I guess I got a little lost in the sauce there, Taylor, of what you were saying. Joe Scally played left back entirely differently to how Jedi Robinson plays it. So in that case, Pochettino did shift what he required of the replacement in a hopes of finding a way to make that work better, or at least as well in the absence of the better tire. Joe Scally stayed home, was a center back on that left side. Jetta Robinson's never done that for the U.S. in a real way. In the second game, we saw a different rogue tire, and it was Max Arston, who played a much more Jetta Robinson game of not tucking in to be that extra center back, instead tending to push higher up the left side. And it wasn't better, right? It just wasn't better. So obviously you want your coach to be proactive in what you're doing in all of this. You want your coach to think through these solutions and try to find the best possible outcomes. That I 100% agree with you there. When you're missing key players, that's an important piece of the puzzle. I guess I am just, it seems like maybe a bit lower than you are on the roster itself of there's a certain point at which tinkering isn't going to fix the fact that the U.S. pool is just not as talented as it could be, and certainly not as talented after you're missing 3 or 4 guys.
All right. Sorry to interrupt, Taylor. We've got to go and pay the bills for a second. We'll be back after this break with more from our manifesto. Total Soccer Show, welcome back. Hope you enjoyed the ads. We're doing our manifesto for the USMNT leading into the 2024 World Cup. Joe, what's up next?
All right, my next point for the United States is the need to optimize club situations for a lot of these key U.S. players. Now, that's not exactly something that Mauricio Pochettino can do by picking up his phone and phoning a few agents, although, who knows, maybe it is something that Mauricio Pochettino can do by picking up his phone and calling a few agents. But there are really 3 players, and Taylor, I'm curious if there's more that come to mind for you, because maybe I'm missing some here. There are 3 key players, I think, that come to mind for me here first and foremost, especially off the back of this window. Matt Turner is number 1, and maybe we need to get Matt Turner to San Diego FC after all, as soon as possible. But, I mean, Matt Turner did not cover himself in glory in that Panama game. We talked about it. Miola talked about it. I was chatting with some goalkeeper coaches about it, and the general consensus is very much it's a little too close to his near post in that moment that Panama score. But it creates a viral moment, so maybe Matt Turner is just doing us all a solid there on the content machine. But getting Matt Turner to somewhere he can play, I think, would be a helpful step for him. Weston McKennie is another one that comes to mind for me. And I think Graham highlighted, or maybe we all did, honestly, highlighted how McKennie was much more of a passenger than a dictator sort of in this window. And that is a big theme for McKennie of going on and off. And that's the cycle of McKennie that I think I talked about earlier this week. I'd love for Weston McKennie to go to a place where he can be more of the man. I don't know if that's going to happen at this point because let's face it, his Juve situation is not bad at all as far as his career is concerned. But for the USMNT where McKennie tends to fade from games, maybe being at a club spot that helps him have more responsibility on his shoulders instead of being the ultimate role guy, I think that would probably help bleed into his national team performances a little bit. And my last one, I know I said that maybe I'm taking my hamstring back, is I can't give up all the way. Is Gio Reyna to anywhere else? Taylor, you and I have talked about Gio Reyna a bunch and kind of what makes sense for his career, and Dortmund clearly not being so attached to him and being willing to sell him. I would love to see Gio Reyna go somewhere, and maybe one season turns out to be revolutionary. I'm not counting on it. Certainly, there's a reason why I named him third of these 3 players. But if those guys could go and find more optimal club situations, and McKennie's is the most nuanced, I think, of this bunch, because Turner and Reyna, the moves are just so obvious that they need to happen. McKennie's less so, but if those players can find club situations where their roles are different, I really honestly think that would help the U.S. How much, I don't know, but if we're talking about how to get the U.S. in a better spot for 26, I do think this would help.
Is it any minutes are good situation, Joe, or is it like minutes at a place that helps the player in what they're trying to do is good?
Yeah, I guess that's a good qualification. Probably the second. Although, man, my bar's pretty low for Matt Turner and Gio Reyna.
Yeah.
Like, I do think for those guys, getting on the field is the most important thing. I'm not talking about getting on the field in League One, sort of. But I am talking about getting meaningful competitive minutes somewhere. And I think that's possible. For Gio, honestly, I actually have no idea if it's possible or not. A move is possible. What happens after that? I mean, I think we've got a growing list of evidence that says not much, probably. But for Turner, I think it's probably fairly simple. The McKennie one is more nuanced and will require from him a drop in level, right? You're not going to go to a Juventus equivalent and become one of the guys for that team. I think you're going to have to drop somewhere down a table in a bigger European league, or you're going to have to do the thing that no U.S. fan really wants him to do and go to Major League Soccer and have Cincinnati actually do what they were thinking about doing and make him a DP or something. I think it's a bad idea of using a DP spot if you're an MLS team, but I think it's a great thing for Weston McKennie and a great thing for the national team. So that's where I land on that.
I have long not wanted that move to happen for Weston McKennie to go to FC Cincinnati. No shots at Cincinnati, just that, Weston was with Schalke and then like now with Juve, and they're such like a historically huge club and have such historic significance, and I want him there, and Timothy Weah's there too, and it's so exciting. Except that this Juve team are the opposite of exciting and are now in a bit of a conundrum this season after sacking their manager. And so I think like it's interesting, Joe, when you said there are 3 names that jump out to you, because I got Turner and Reina right away, just because they have no minutes. And then from there it was like, well, it could be this guy, or it could be that guy, or it could be this guy, because then there's the stylistic aspect of things. And so at the end of the day, I maybe reverse course a little bit, and I wonder if Weston McKennie goes to Cincinnati and is maybe the man and is given license to, like, create, drive forward with the ball, try to find some passes, explore some options versus, like, retain possession, don't shift out of this central zone where you're supposed to operate, like, which is what I kind of feel like he's asked to do at Juve. Like, does it make him a better player? Does that level of responsibility kickstart an aspect of his game we haven't seen in some while? I kind of think it's what happened with Michael Bradley when he goes to Toronto, a move that I did not like when it happened, thought it didn't make sense, but he becomes a much more important focal point and leader for the USMNT, in my opinion. There are plenty of people who feel very differently about Michael Bradley, but I wonder if that maybe could help Weston McKennie. I don't know if it would help Gio Reyna. That would be interesting. I definitely think MLS would help Matt Turner, but I would also say, like, Tim Weah, for similar reasons to what I've already said about McKennie and Juventus, might be in that list. Chris Richards, I don't understand, because he is playing for Crystal Palace, right? And yet
every game
doesn't feel like he is always the guy that Pochettino looks at and thinks that's the guy that I want to anchor my defense. Yunus Musa seems to play 14 positions for Milan. I'm not sure that is the ideal thing either. So, Joe, I had a similar thing of like solidify club situations, but I think within that is where I like earlier had the point of like we need to figure out maybe which players give us the best hope of playing some level of a unified way, instead of like, well, this guy plays for this club and is a big name, so he's got to be there, and this guy plays for this club and is a big name, so he's got to be there. I found myself wondering at the end of this window, like, would Brendan Aronson have fit better? Would he have run more and pressed harder? Probably.
Certainly.
So then I wonder, like, is he a type of person who should be in a team more often at the expense of somebody who is maybe more of an ever-present fixture, but perhaps shouldn't be that ever-present at this point?
Joe, can I ask about the general premise of someone like Weston McKennie playing in a zillion different positions? I mean, from my perspective, he's captained Juve on occasion this team. He basically plays every game, give or take. And he's playing at a high level.
Yep.
How does playing in one single position week in, week out actually make him a better national team player? I can't quite get on board with that.
I mean, I guess it seems like a fairly logical progression for me, where if you think about what Weston McKennie's role is for the U.S., it's in central midfield, right? And when you're being asked to play every fourth game in central midfield for Juventus, and even to be more nuanced there, his role for the U.S. is to be like a box-to-box player 9 times out of 10, maybe 95 times out of 100. And for Juventus, he's doing that role even less. He's doing that role once every 2 months. You know, that's an approximation. But he's not getting the reps in that spot that would make him better at doing that thing. Now, he's getting experience and minutes against types of pressure and defenses and quality that make him good at doing things, right? Weston McKennie, by and large, is a very useful U.S. men's national team player. What I am wondering, and I don't know if this would work, what I'm wondering is if he got to do his U.S. role for a club team on a regular basis at a decent level. I recognize MLS is not Serie A in terms of the quality. It's not really all that close at the moment. That is a bit of a risk to go and drop down in terms of level, but I think the types of actions that he would get to do, and also there is like a bit of a mentality thing here that I'm kind of latching onto as well, where if Weston McKennie knew that he had to shoulder more responsibility to how his team plays week in and week out, that maybe would translate in some way to him with the national team, where profile-wise, he kind of does have to shoulder more of that responsibility, whether he likes it or not. So there you go.
Yeah. Okay. To echo that, I think it's jack of all trades, master of none, essentially, or maybe master of a couple for McKennie.
Yeah.
Juve, just because, like, if you are
a couple of very specific things that
right?
come up every 6 games.
Wand celebrations. He's the best. But like, I think if you are playing centrally and being asked to like receive on the half turn and then distribute it into the channels or distribute into the half spaces to feet, and there is a regularity and a repetition in what you're being asked to do with the ball and how you're being asked to progress it, it starts to become pattern. It starts to become second nature. And so then, in my mind, at least, when he's playing for the national team and he's asked to do something similar, I think he is going to say, that's not where you need to be. You need to be here. This needs to be this way. I think there's more command there versus if you are a jack of all trades, you're sort of like, well, that guy's not there, but I could probably hit this pass over the top, or maybe I could carry, or maybe I should play it back to a center back. I don't think there is as much confidence on the ball and in his decision making. I also think, separate from that, that Joe saying it's a fairly logical progression for me is his equivalent of saying it's simple. And I think I really enjoy Joe's way of saying the thing without having to be mean about saying the thing. That's what I'm picking up on. Having received that same comment from Joe several times in my life.
Points received from both of you. I guess my point was like being well-rounded at the very top level has its benefits, and you're never going to have a like for like. Like if you look at England, like Jack Grealish, he can play in the same part of the field for England that he does for Man City, but he's asked to do different things, and he's in a different setup. Okay. So it's apples to oranges, isn't it?
It is.
But
they're both fruit, So.
But I think what I was initially going to be catty about and say is like, but is he well-rounded though? And I think he is. I take your point. I would then say I kind of think that's almost the problem with the majority of this team is that they're all sort of mostly well-rounded jack of all trades, but very few of them are like doing this one thing this particular way, this style of play. And so they're all kind of like, well, I guess I could pass it, or I guess I could dribble it, or I guess I could lay it off. And it doesn't feel like there are enough players in there who have a very clear idea of how they're playing, have a very clear level of ability in that way. And so, yes, it probably makes him a better, well-rounded player, but I think the U.S. is desperate for a few more players who are elite at certain things, and you can build around those elite skills. Like, I would say Croatia do that with Luka Modric, who is kind of a master of all trades, but they kind of really play to his strengths, which is why he can continue to be such a critical player for them at he's either 54 or 55 at this point in his career.
He's 54 at heart. Let's give him that.
He's probably not even 40, but whatever.
I like the way that well-rounded is the diplomatic, nice way of saying jack of all trades. We're basically saying the same thing, which is excellent.
Yeah. It's the diplomatic way of saying master of none is what it is. It's the diplomatic way of saying.
Maybe so. All right, let's get to our next manifesto point. Taylor Rockwell, if you don't mind.
So I had a similar thing about figure out club situations. I would then say, like, in terms of roster and player selection, and this is where I think a lot of this can be sort of contradictory, because while I'm saying that there shouldn't be guaranteed spots, I will say I think doing a final dual national push and then more or less setting the player pool after that is probably the best course of action in my mind, because I think so often, at least as a fan base, we look towards who could come in and save us, who could be another fullback that might be able to do a Jedi-dest thing, who could be another potential number 9. And that has been useful for the United States in the past when those players have materialized. Maybe there are dual nationals out there who could be those players, but a lot of the names we have talked about previously and I have talked about very excitedly, like Henri Chase and Luca Koleosho, are not playing at all or not playing very much at this point. And so I think to some extent, looking at dual nationals, identifying this guy could actually help, this player could actually help us. Let's make an aggressive push for maybe not guaranteeing that World Cup spot, but guaranteeing there's a strong chance that if you perform well in camps, you are going to a World Cup. Sort of settle that, get the recruitment done, and then the chips fall where they may, and then we kind of have a clear idea of what the pool is going to be and accepting those limitations therein.
Yeah, I like that. So, like, doing a Billy Bean on the dual nationals in Europe at this point, kind of running the numbers.
Yes, dude. I can't get over it. That's the third time now. You actually put it to words that time. That is the third time in this episode I have thought of Moneyball and Billy Bean, where it's like, yeah, we can't replace a Jedi Robinson, so we shouldn't try to replace him. We got to replace his RPI, I guess? Is that what we've got to replace? Like I'm not sure how you do that with a soccer player, but there's a lot of Moneyball about this team that needs to happen.
Can we do on base percentage for soccer? No, just standing on the field, that probably doesn't hit in the same way as it does for Billy Bean.
That's what it is, right? It's on base.
Yeah, he's like, yeah, what do you have to do? Get on base. That's the whole thing. I have dual national call-ups on my list as well. This is just an ever-present thing, I think, that I think about. I honestly hadn't considered the roster freeze in quite the same way. Taylor, I think this group gaining chemistry needs to happen, right? And gaining more chemistry. And it felt like they were on a really good track after 2022. And it's felt less like that since then. So I'm all about that. The couple of names that are on my dual national list, first and foremost, Nathaniel Brown. Still, we've talked about him before, Nene Brown for Eintracht Frankfurt. Is still would need to file a one-time switch to play for the U.S., but it's still on the table. And man, looking at this past window, I know we're not talking about the same level of player as Jedi Robinson, I think Nathaniel Brown would help this U.S. team and would almost certainly make a U.S. World Cup roster. And the other one is Lucho Acosta still, just to bring that name back around. There are lots of other names that I think fall, but Lucho Acosta told Backheeled earlier this month, I guess, that he is very much working towards becoming a USMNT player, and that's something that he is working towards, and I think was a happy byproduct of him staying in Dallas, or moving to Dallas and staying in the U.S. rather than going to Argentina, which is kind of what it seemed like he really wanted to do. But I think he would help this U.S. team in one way or another, and helps also fill that Gio Reyna void a little bit.
Excellent stuff. All right. Sorry, Taylor. Go ahead.
Oh no. I've just got the next one that I'm excited for both of you to be like, that's an interesting approach.
Well, why don't we take a little pause, Taylor? When we come back, we'll hear that interesting approach on Taylor's manifesto. Join us then. Total Soccer Show. Welcome back to USMNT Weekly, where we are making the USMNT great again. Mustn't go? It's not going on a hat. Anyway, let's go to Taylor's next manifesto point, please.
So if I'm U.S. Soccer, maybe just a casual sit down and just like this is the least realistic, but maybe just sit down with Pochettino and be like, hey, you want to be here, right? Like, you definitely want to coach this team at a World Cup. Like, you're not already agreeing to deal with Spurs, are you?
Sorry, Joe Levy's on the phone. What did you say?
Like, this is kind of my concern. And it wasn't really until this window. I didn't really buy into the, like, yeah, I'd love to manage Tottenham one day. I think I said as much last week or maybe the week before. However, I thought Pochettino coming in would be that sort of, like, Bielsa-esque, like, we're playing this way, this is the philosophy, this is the style, get on board or get out of my way. And I don't need him to be a brute about it, but I thought there was going to be a bit more clarity in message and sort of straightforward in approach and purpose, and I'm not sure we have seen as much of that, exemplified by, I struggle to say with, like, full confidence exactly what the U.S. is trying to do in certain phases of the game, which is maybe a product of the limited number of windows, as Joe has already outlined. But there is a part of me that then hears stuff about, like, yeah, I haven't really watched enough of him. I haven't really seen enough of him to be familiar with that player. The quote that Jeff talked about yesterday about, like, yeah, we never thought they were going to score, so we figured we'd have extra time. Those are not the types of things that I remember Poch saying when he was Spurs manager, even PSG manager and maybe Chelsea manager. It felt like there was much more clarity and vision. This guy fits what I need him to do. This guy plays the way I want him to play. I'm building around these two. This guy isn't doing what I need, so until he does, he's going to be kind of on the outside looking in. I just don't feel like we have seen this team fully start to be molded into a Mauricio Pochettino side yet. And at a certain point, I start to wonder, like, is that because he's in there because he wants to do this and wants to kind of lead a national team and see if he can make a team that could be good even better? Or is it because it's a really well-compensated gig that allows him to try something he hasn't done before, that doesn't have the intensity and pressure of a global, like, branded club? Or is he there because that's what he wants to do? And I think this window just made me a little bit more nervous about that than I had been previously. So maybe redoubling the idea that this is a Pochettino team with a Pochettino identity is something that would make me very content ahead of 2026.
Seems that's down to one dude, right?
Pretty much. Yeah, and maybe that is very unfair. It just it feels to some extent like some of these rosters are filled with players that he has a passing familiarity with, has maybe seen some of. Maybe he's kind of relying on past rosters or U.S. soccer personnel to say, like, this is a guy who usually does this. This is a guy who we can call upon. I don't know how much, like, ownership there has been in some of his rosters. That could also be English as a second language factoring in. So I don't want to be discourteous or discredit what he has done. But I think there are just those lingering questions that start to pop up when things aren't going well.
Yeah, and Poch just talked a ton about how, like, one thing he says all the time in pressers is that he wants to like touch the players. He wants to be around the players, to feel the players. Mm-hmm. He wants to work with these guys in person, right? Yeah, it's a little odd how it translates there, but his English is great. Like, he wants to be around the players, and I think he has been really hurt in a lot of ways by the fact that he hasn't been able to be around all of the key players. Serginho Dest has still not been in camp for the U.S. men's national team. I believe the same is true for Lauren Balogun. Gio Reyna and Tyler Adams were just in their very first camp. Weston McKennie. There were a bunch of players that had to go home halfway through the first camp, or did go home halfway through the first camp. This is just one of those tricky things, and this isn't all of what you're saying, Taylor, at all, but just sort of my point off the back of this is, yeah, there's just not a lot of time to work with these dudes. And Poch keeps saying it's not time to worry, it's not time to panic. I look ahead to June, into the Gold Cup, and to the fact that the clubs get priority clubs of the Club World Cup get priority for their players over the national team this summer. And the U.S. has friendlies against Turkey and Switzerland, and I would imagine that Gio Reyna and Weston McKennie and Tim Weah, if they're still with their clubs, because Borussia Dortmund and Juventus are both in the Club World Cup, are not going to be around for at least the Gold Cup, because that's what U.S. Soccer's already talked about. And probably for those pre-Gold Cup friendlies, it would be odd for them to go from club to country back to club again in such a short period of time. I don't know. That's no insider info there. I could be totally wrong. Just speculating. The opportunities to have the full group have been 0 so far, and are probably still going to be 0 all the way until the fall. Like, we're looking at another 5-6 months probably before this happens. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to develop a team that looks as good as we all want it to when Pochettino doesn't get to work with a lot of those players. It's just a tricky situation.
It is, especially when I think historically Pochettino has been pretty regimented in the way he wants his teams to defend, in the way he wants them to transition to defense and then transition into attack. But in the attack, I think there has been a perception that there is a looseness to the way he wants them to do certain things consistently, especially on the counter. But in possession, I think he relies on the individuals. There's an idea. You all are professionals. You know what you're doing. You can make something happen. And maybe that was a thing that he thought would apply to the United States. And I think what we're realizing, or at least I'm realizing, is I don't think we have the disposition or ability to have that level of looseness to the attack. And so I think maybe even, you're right, Joe, having those players in camp and being around them more often would maybe allow him to get that message across. But I think it would also allow him to be all right, you know what, this isn't going to work. We've got to have a clear idea of attack or give the ball back, or we've got to have a clear idea of how we're going to defend and then only play on the counter. But I think to some extent, the lack of players in camp, or some of those players not being in camp, the lack of reps just hasn't really benefited him so far. But also, don't talk nicely about former clubs, and then I'll feel even better.
Fair enough. Joe Lowry, would you like to give us one more manifesto point? Make it a good one.
Oh, the pressure's on. This is my last manifesto point, so this is good. My last point is refine Christian Pulisic's role. And I mean this in 2 ways. The first way that I mean, and this ties to the Diego Luna point from earlier, is move Christian Pulisic out of the middle. Now, I'm always the one where we talk about how the U.S. sets up. I feel like I try to point out that in possession, they rarely, if ever, play with a pure number 10, right? Against Panama, there was no pure number 10, or at least not for stretches of that game. I suppose Tanner Tessman at times weirdly did act like a pure number 10. Taylor, you and I texted about that, if you remember, where they pushed him out of midfield and then he was kind of underneath the striker. That's not a real regular thing for Poch. No. It's mostly been a flat line of 5 across the attacking line, which means you have your striker in the middle of that 5 and 2 players flanking him. There's nobody really directly underneath him. So Pulisic, by and large, has not played in a purely central attacking role. But there is nuance here. I try to provide nuance with that flat line of 5. I want to do it here again in a different way. Against Canada, the U.S. in a lot of their early build-up moments and a lot of their attacking play, because they didn't get so settled high up the field to form that back 3 and to form that line of 5 across the front line, Christian Pulisic was hanging out as the number 10 a lot. He was defending as the number 10 alongside Patrick Agyemang in that 4-4-2. And then when the U.S. had the ball, he was playing underneath Agyemang for long stretches and was just really ineffective. And I know there's been a lot of folks over time that have talked about how Pulisic should be the 10 for this team. I think this team has evolved past that, where in games where you're not going to be in established possession moments camped out in the opposition half, it really is worth moving Pulisic wider because he's got more space to work with. He can go and attack and go 1v1 at players, and I don't think he does that well. I don't think he does that as well, I should say, through the middle, especially when you have a Diego Luna, who I honestly think could do that job just a little bit better. He does other things way worse than Pulisic, but he does some things way better. So I would move Pulisic out of the middle, and I would also move Pulisic off set pieces. Man, Pulisic calling off Pochettino to take it to not let him come off the field, essentially. Him saying, "I am not coming off yet. I got to go take this set piece." It was ridiculous. It was ridiculous because it was in defiance of the manager against Canada, which is just, that doesn't sit super well with me. But also it's that Pulisic has not really been ever very good at taking set pieces. So to call off the sub is one thing. To call off the sub to do something that you're generally kind of bad at is totally a different thing on top of the first thing. I think somebody's got to wrestle, and this is Pochettino's duty ultimately. Somebody's got to wrestle those free kicks and corner kicks away from Pulisic. The corners I'm not as bothered about, but for a U.S. team that struggles to generate chances in open play, it feels like such an opportunity to do in England at the 2018 World Cup and to try to be dominant in the air. And that just has not been a thing for the U.S. in this generation of players ever. And Pulisic, I think, is a huge part of that problem.
Joe, if you have 10 free kicks from like 25 yards out,
Ooh.
how many are you giving to Pulisic? How many are you giving to Diego Luna?
I'm giving 0 to Pulisic, to be honest. I have to go back and check, so that might be short-sighted and uninformed. I am now really curious to check Pulisic's like free kick stats over the years. I don't know exactly how good Diego Luna is at those kinds of things either. I think he is probably more capable, but there's got to be somebody around, right? Like, can we give it to Tim Weah? I feel like Tim Weah puts good texture on those balls. I don't know. I like giving things to Tim Weah.
Pulisic takes corners for Milan, but he doesn't take free kicks, right? Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah. He has certainly taken corners from Milan. I cannot think of a lot of free kicks that he's taken.
Yeah. So maybe that's it.
Make the change, Poch. That's all I'm saying. We're talking about, okay, sorry to belabor this. Berhalter is fired and Pochettino comes in.
What?
And what I know, crazy, breaking news.
I'm really behind.
Yeah, welcome, Ryan. Like, there wasn't a lot of super low-hanging fruit, in my mind, for Pochettino to come in and fix, like, these 12 things, and immediately the U.S. are going to be a quarterfinal team. To your point, Taylor, earlier, there are probably 8 teams that can realistically win the World Cup. Some other teams could maybe get hot and make a deep run. We've seen that before. The U.S. are in the they need to get hot to make a deep run kind of territory. I think set pieces would honestly, genuinely help them do that, and that might be the lowest of all of the somewhat limited low-hanging fruit for Pochettino to go and grab, and it's a bit depressing to me that we haven't seen that happen so far.
Yeah, I mean, it goes. I agree with that, Joe. And then I think it does go back to like the player pool conversation. I read a few different articles about like, you know, where does the U.S. go from here? What should they do? And one of them was making this argument that like it's the same old players, it's the same old guard. Like, why hasn't Gianluca Busio been given an opportunity? And it's like, well, first of all, I think he did, but also, is that what we're gonna like stake the World Cup on? Like, I do think that sort of gap in quality is pretty sizable and is pretty difficult to overcome. So yeah, the low-hanging fruit point is a valid one. With the fullbacks, Joe, for a moment, if we did have Jedi and Dest fully fit, which one do you trust more to like operate more centrally in the half spaces of attack? I'm assuming it's Dest.
Dest is my pick. Although Jedi did that against Jamaica and looked kind of okay doing that stuff. So, but yeah, Dest is still my pick.
So that's good to know, and that's where I thought you would be. So maybe you can help me solve this one then, because I want Pulisic wide as well. I think that is a fair idea and a very good idea. Would you rather for the United States have him on the left or on the right, with the idea that Dest on the right probably allows Pulisic to stay wider, whereas Jedi on the left, I feel like Jedi gives you that width, so then you have Pulisic moving inside. It's
a good question, Taylor. I like the way that you framed that. I would still lean left because I think, again, to go back to what the U.S. looks like when they push high up the field and control the ball, really they're not using a pure number 10. And I think that's fine because even though I like Diego Luna, I don't think he like demands that sort of role and that sort of attention to be so ball dominant in zone 14. I don't think they need to play with that player necessarily. Pulisic, in that case with Jedi overlapping on the left side, can still pinch inside to the left half space, and then he can rotate wide and combine, and they can swap positions a little bit. And I think you're okay. The real reason, though, that I say left side is because I think Tim Weah, number 1, is better on the right, and number 2, I think that Tim Weah and Serginho Dest, when Dest is healthy, are a pretty reliable source of revenue for the United States in the attack, where throughout World Cup qualifying, Weah was the brightest attacking player for the U.S. for long stretches of qualifying into 2022, and is a pretty consistent performer on the attacking end with the United States by and large. And he and Dest are just so fluid and crafty and savvy on the ball that I think they combine and understand each other really well. And despite the fact that Poch is mostly used Weah on the left, I do not think he's nearly as good on that side. So I would move Weah over to the right and have him and Dest combine, and I would have Jedi Robinson and Pulisic as more of the direct kind of vertical side over on the left. That's where I come at it from.
I like it because I think my tactical wrinkle was just going to be a thing I talked about, I think, in the Panama game with the U.S. shape and how few numbers they had committed to the attack. I want to get rid of one of the fullbacks staying home as part of the back three, and I want to just return to the age-old center midfielder becomes the center back, except I want to do it 30 yards further up the pitch than where Michael Bradley used to do it. But I kind of want it to be 2 center backs on either side of Tyler Adams, maybe 40 yards from the opposition goal, with the 2 fullbacks pushed way up, and that allows maybe some kind of better combinations out wide between Jedi and Pulisic and Weah and Dest, whomever might be there, but I think it also then allows you to still have numbers in the middle as you need them, ideally press resistant, good ball movers in the middle with a good goal scorer, and then we're cooking. And then we got a stew going. But like that is maybe more nuanced, potentially problematic if those two players aren't able to go, those two fullbacks. But I think just a few different looks in the attack with some level of repetition behind them would be good. And then on the defensive side, like to kind of put a bullet point on this one, I think my general thing was like stick with the approach, but adjust the specifics. And with the defense, I would like to have a clear idea of when we are going to be a pressing team and when we are going to be a bunkering team. Because I think the U.S. is capable of playing more so bunker and then counter, and I think probably will against stronger opposition, but I think also can have joy in pressing, winning the ball back high, trying to catch teams that want to bunker us in advantageous positions for the United States. But I'm not sure we have a clarity of when they're doing it and how they're doing it, and so we end up getting sort of like, oh, I think they pressed there, but now they're sitting off a little bit, now they're kind of in a mid-block. Like I don't feel like I have a clear idea of what they want to do on the defensive side of things. Perhaps that's just me not paying enough attention, but I think any level of clarity on that side would also make me feel better.
There you go, ladies and gents. Our manifesto for improving the USMNT on the road to the 2026 World Cup. I'll just add one. I know we're running long, but I'd like to add one small point, which I don't think we've touched on. Neither of you cowards have had the courage to go at US soccer, so I'm going to quickly do it if you don't mind. And you can challenge me on this if you like, but when you look in the media, when you look at sort of, B2B media, when you look at businesses, they're all treating this World Cup as an opportunity. That's the phrase that's used a lot. This is a great opportunity coming next summer. And my concern is this is a commercial opportunity. It's being treated as a commercial opportunity at the moment and not one to raise the tide of soccer in the United States in a way that, say, the 94 World Cup might have done. I think there's things that US soccer could be doing that they may be neglecting that they could do to get more further around this US national team. Now, obviously, with the empty-ish stadium at SoFi, we can put a lot of that blame on CONCACAF, but I would say the US is a major player in CONCACAF. It's the financial power. It's a superpower within the organization. So if you're going to have all your tournaments staged in the US, show a bit of muscle to have things go your way a bit in terms of getting butts on seats as well. So don't necessarily say, CONCACAF held our hands behind our backs and made us have double headers. Make it so that's not the case. So the US gets some support at games, really important games, 15 months out from a tournament. It's a slightly woolly point, Taylor, I guess. But my point being, I think we've got a runway here to get people excited. We've got a point next year where we could have more people talking about soccer in this country who don't currently. A lot of that's going to be down to the actual success on the field, admittedly, and it's going to come after the fact. But there is a runway here, and I don't think it's Mauricio Pochettino doing an awkward interview on Jimmy Kimmel or anything like that. There are things that can be done by the federation that are being left to the wayside, I would contend.
How would you, Ryan, market this team? How would you go about getting people who are going to maybe casually watch but maybe don't care about U.S. soccer? Like, what would you pitch to them? Because I think that is part of the problem. It's a tough team to sell at present, even if it shouldn't be.
It is a tough sell, but I would be a bit more insistent about maybe spending some marketing money on it. I would have Paramount put it on Big Boy CBS rather than a streaming for games like this.
I think they did not do that.
That is, well, in hindsight, but it's a hard sell, as you say, for the caliber of game, particularly with an empty stadium. But there is a circumstance where it wouldn't have been that way. There could have been build up to a Mauricio Pochettino team and telling the story of how significant that is for US soccer. So I think I'll come back to kind of marketing and money spend, I suppose, but that's an important way of getting eyes on it.
Yeah.
You want as many people, Taylor, outside of soccer talking about soccer as well. You want movie stars talking about soccer. Dare I say it, you want the president talking about soccer as well. You want everyone to bring as much attention to this team as you can to kind of try and build a cultural moment behind this team.
I think that's fair. I think it's probably also fair to your point that if you have a mostly packed stadium of USMNT supporters and you are on CBS, I think if you are an American player, you are aware that there are a lot of eyes on you. And I would equate it to like NFL players talking about why they love playing Monday Night Football is the entire country is watching you play football. It's going to raise your effort just that little bit. And I wonder if looking around a almost completely empty stadium and knowing that you're on a streaming platform, like maybe it doesn't carry that weight or significance to some extent. That's definitely an intangible thing and maybe a minor thing, but minor things can accumulate into larger things.
Yeah.
They can indeed.
Yeah, and sorry, to go back, again, I'm ignorant about some of this stuff, I'll be honest, and would like to learn more about it, and probably should spend a little time and energy into trying to do that. I feel like this is, I think we're missing some context here on U.S. soccer and their role. And you acknowledged earlier this week, Ryan, about how it's CONCACAF that schedules these games. U.S. soccer undoubtedly has a seat at the table in a lot of discussions with CONCACAF, and so I hear what you're saying regarding this specific window and about the moment of the World Cup and needing to capitalize on that moment. I do think we've been a bit dismissive so far. Honestly, I guess, Ryan, I think you've been a bit dismissive of some of the things that U.S. soccer has done to try to capitalize on momentum here. I'm not saying that there isn't a lot of work to do. Think about the National Training Center, though, in Atlanta. And I think about hiring Mauricio Pochettino, for goodness sakes. That wasn't on the radar, and that took a level of ambition that U.S. soccer has literally never showed before prior to hiring Emma Hayes. You had Emma Hayes and you had Mauricio Pochettino, and you think about the National Training Center, which is a massive investment, truly. Like, that is so much work, and it's something that we've never seen before in the American landscape in the way that U.S. soccer is investing in that. I think about Michelle Kang investing, $30 million into the women's side of U.S. soccer, trying to impress the sport there, because it's not just the men's side that could benefit from the World Cup in 26. It's the women's side, and then hopefully again off the back of maybe the 2031 World Cup. Then I think about something we haven't talked about on the show much, but U.S. soccer sometime last year announced a new foundation called Soccer Forward and seeded $10 million into that right off the jump with the goal of raising a bunch more money, because it's going to take a lot more money to invest into the grassroots side of all this, which is probably the most important part of all this. So heard on what you're saying, that there is a lot of work to be done here. And I am not as well educated on U.S. soccer and politics and side of that as many of our other colleagues in this space. But just to raise a few things there to, I guess, be a bit more justifiable and charitable to sort of what U.S. soccer is doing.
Yeah, that's completely fair, actually, Joe. And I think maybe maybe what the ideas I'm suggesting are pie in the sky. Maybe if you're U.S. soccer and you're listening to me rant on like this, you're saying, yeah, we're trying all that. It's really hard. It's easier said than done. Maybe that's the case, right?
Yeah.
And it is.
I'm sure that is true. The question is what more is actually going to be done, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. I suppose my overall thing is I want this World Cup to be more than a commercial moment. I want it to be a sporting moment. And I would like everything to be done possible for that to be the case. And I'm sure they're not sitting on their hands, right? They're doing something. But I'd like to see something more.
Well, if Poch listens to our list, then we're good to go. Solved it. Solved soccer, solved America. You're welcome.
We have indeed. All right. I hope this was a productive discussion. I certainly have fun having it. Taylor Rockwell, thank you very much indeed for manifestoing with us.
I hope it was as intelligible as the Unabombers.
Wow. I was trying to make... Oh, no, I wasn't going to go there, but you did. Joe Larry, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Ryan.
Listener, thank you very much for joining us on this episode. We'll be back on the feed very shortly, but for now, bye.